guys, it's your boy Luke here for our round 1 prize picks targets for this week's Valero Texas Open. We're back after last week, which was a little bit of an off week for prize picks. Of course, with the WGC, the strange format made it a little bit less attractive to attack the board. And of course, with the alternate field event being the only normal stroke play event that we had, we didn't get props for all 4 rounds. So a little bit of a reset. Glad to get back to it this week. Of course, next week for the Masters, I assume there's going to be a ton of content out there for prize picks. So looking to get some momentum going forward and perhaps to go ahead and build up that bankroll a little bit before we get to the biggest week of golf of the year. Here in this video though, we'll be covering my top 5 props for the first round of the Valero Texas Open. Now this is coming out on Monday, of course, so we can't really look at the weather forecast. It would be a little bit too early to do so, but as of right now, without any of that in mind, these are going to be my top props for the first round. So with that being said, let's go ahead and hop right on into it. We'll go ahead and start off this preview as we always do with a review of some of the key stats from the Valero Texas Open. Last year in 2020, we did have Jordan Spieth coming through as the winner. Of course, he won at 18 under par, which is one of the better winning scores we've seen over the years. It was only bested in 2019 by Corey Connors, who ended up winning at 20 under par. But in general, this is a relatively tough golf course. That's evidenced by the average score here. You can see it played to 0.49 shots over par last year. So even though Jordan Spieth ended up taking it to 18 under par, Charlie Hoffman took it to 16 under par. In general, the scoring was hard to come by. A lot of that is due to the greens here. They are raised surfaces. That means they're about 4 to 5 yards around the even level of the rest of the golf course. They also tend to have quite a bit of undulation. There's a lot of slope on these greens. They also tend to run pretty firm and fast, given that we're in Austin, Texas, San Antonio, Texas. This time of year tends to be very dry. You run it right around a 12.5, 13 on the stimp meter, which really adds a lot of difficulty. In general, it's not the longest golf course, right around 7,400 yards. It also plays a little bit shorter because of the firm and fast fairways that we get at this part of the country. But because of those greens, the complexity that they have, you do see the scores to be a little bit higher at this golf course than what we're used to seeing week in and week out. In general, the fairways are pretty easy to hit, just a little bit lower than the tour average there at 2.6%. That can mostly be attributed to the fact that they're firm and fast. You will get quite a bit of rollout on these fairways, so if you aren't going to split the fairway, hit it relatively down the middle, you might end up running out into the first cut. The greens in regulation are a little bit harder to hit, 6.4% lower than the tour average right there. A lot of that is because they're raised surfaces, and like I said, they have a ton of undulation to them. That means that there's plenty of chip-off areas, runoff areas. That means that even some of the best iron shots that you can hit will end up trundling off of the green. So in terms of a statistical profile, the greens of regulation, you might want to be taking a look at some of the unders, given that just 61% of greens are going to be hit on average. And with the fairways, perhaps there may be a few unders as well. There's only 14 fairways out there. And for some of the more inaccurate drivers, particularly some of the longer drivers on tour, they may be affected by those firm and fast conditions, some of those extremely bouncy lies, a little bit more than the shorter players on tour. So in general, we're heading over here to prize picks. You can see I'm targeting 4 overs when it comes to birdie or better. A lot of that comes down to the fact that there's a ton of birdies out there. Even though the average score is over par, you see an average of 3.9 birdies made at this golf course, which means that for some of these elite level players, you can expect them to be making closer to 4.5 or 5 per round. You can see we're taking an under on somebody for the fairways and an under on Hideki Matsuyama for the greens of regulation. So we'll touch on all of them one by one, but in general, trying to target some of these higher volatile plays for birdies or better. So we'll start off with Rory McIlroy here at 4.5 birdies or better. He is obviously coming in with pretty solid form. He has 3 straight top 33 finishes, a 33rd over there at the Players. That was a result of him not having his best stuff on the greens. He gained over 2.5 strokes in every category from tee to green, that being off the tee, approach, and around the green. That's exactly what we're looking for here at TPC San Antonio. He also finished top 15 at both the Genesis Invitational and the Arnold Palmer Invitational, where he finished 13th. Very similar golf courses where you have very similar greens as well. We've been dealing with Bermuda grass greens overseeded with Poa Trivialis for the last 5 or 6 events, and that will be the same type of surfaces we have this week. And outside of the Players Championship, he's performed pretty well. He's gained strokes on all of those greens except for what he saw the last time out. So hopefully that was an aberration, but either way, he's an aggressive player, obviously one of the best off the tee players on tour. And given the fact that the rough here isn't very penal at all, you can definitely get away with missing fairways at TPC San Antonio. I expect him to have a very solid round. Even if he goes out there, has a blow up hole or two, ends up hitting it into the woods like Kevin Na did back in the day, not going to affect his birdie or better prop, just needs to be out there making enough putts to make it count. And as long as he can turn that putter around, which was really only bad at the Players' Championship, I'm expecting him to have a relatively easy way to 5 birdies. Next up, we have Bryson DeChambeau, also at 4.5 birdies or better. And I was a huge skeptic of Bryson last week. I thought he was going to have a really hard time out there at the match play, and really he proved me wrong. He went out there, was swinging at right around 80 percentile strength for at least Wednesday and Thursday, was hitting the ball about 310, 315 yards off the tee. But by the time that Friday came around, which ended up being his last round out there, he did not end up making it through the group stage. He was hitting those 370, 380 yard drives. Now, granted, that was at Austin Country Club, another Texas golf course where you're going to get plenty of rollout with the firm and fast conditions, but he was still getting it out there a long way to get 370 yard drives. If he's slowly ramping up back to speed, of course, the goal to be back to perfect condition by next week at Augusta National, I expect him to be able to go out, test it a little bit out there, and try and give it a full go. And honestly, if this is going to be a full go Bryson DeChambeau, this is an interesting course fit because, like I said before, the rough here isn't very penal at all. In fact, it's one of the easiest golf courses to hit out of the rough. It's also a golf course that plays extremely long on the par 3s, and 3 of the par 5s are over 600 yards. So if he can get the ball out there 370, 380 yards, he's going to have no trouble at all reaching them. In fact, he might be one of the only players in the field other than a Rory McIlroy, who we're also taking the over for birdies or better here, to be able to reach those par 5s. So I really like both of these bomber mindsets here. And even though Bryson DeChambeau was somebody I was giving quite a bit of crap to last week, is somebody that I'm willing to go back to here. Next up, the last birdie or better prop that I'm looking at here for round 1 is going to be Gary Woodland at 4 birdies or better. Very similar profile to somebody like a Rory or a Bryson. Long off the tee, very solid putter when he has his best stuff. And the kicker here is we get him at 4 birdies or better. So we end up tying if he only gets to the 4 mark. He's been gaining in form over the last month or so, slowly but surely putting up made cuts. A few top 25 finishes mixed in there. Was in contention at the Honda Classic at one point. Just in general, Gary Woodland is starting to look like the Gary Woodland of old. He's somebody who gains a ton of strokes off the tee, of course, is one of the best ball strikers in the world, and it really just comes down to the putter, which can be volatile for Gary Woodland at times, but over the last 24 measured rounds, he's in one of the best stretches of putting that he's ever had in his career. In fact, when he went out there and won the U.S. Open back in the day, he was in an even worse stretch of putting than what he is right now. He's in an absolutely great stretch of form right here. So if he can continue to hit the ball great off the tee, if he struggles with anything, it is that accuracy. Much like a Rory McIlroy and Bryson is going to get it out there a country mile. Can take advantage of those par 5s that much of the field isn't going to be able to take advantage of. I expect him to have a really solid tournament. And of course, for our prize picks card here, where we're hoping he gets to the 5 birdies or better mark, I think that is more than reasonable. Now moving on to our single prop targets here, where we're going to be trying to take some unders. Let's go ahead and start with the fairways prop, which is going to be Ches Reavie under 9 fairways hit. He's one of the more accurate drivers on tour, but in terms of relative accuracy, you can see just hitting about 63.4% of fairways on average here, over 14 fairways. That means that the average player is going to hit right around 7.5, 8 fairways, maybe 9 fairways if they end up having a solid day. So even though Ches Reavie is above average with his accuracy, I don't know if I'd be taking the over at 9 fairways. He has struggled over the last month or so on tour, hasn't made very many cuts. And again, even though he has historically been a much better player, that's not how we can evaluate him at this point. He's a different player, is getting older. Perhaps he's dealing with decline due to age, just general decline in efficiency over time. And whatever the case is, he's somebody that we should be projecting for a much lower fairway hit percentage than where he's at. In fact, if I were making the line on him, I would have had it at closer to 8 fairways, maybe even 7.5 fairways, closer to some of the guys at the bottom of the board, like Bryson DeChambeau, Robert McIntyre, Gary Woodland, because he's been in that type of form. He's been one of the worst players in this entire field. If you take a look at recent form metrics, he's in the bottom 20 out of 140 players. So that tells you anything about his game of late. He's not a good player that you want to be backing this week, so just taking the under there. A lot of the other players up top are in decent form. The only other one that I would say is in shaky form would be a Henrik Stenson. Also hasn't been making very many cuts. But whatever the case is, of course, we're trying to get to a 12.5x parlay. By taking 3 overs and 2 unders, we're able to accomplish that type of thing, which is why I like targeting Ches Reavie. And now lastly, for the other under, to try and get to the full value parlay, we're going to be taking Hideki Matsuyama under 12.5 greens of regulation. And typically 12.5 greens would be a great number for Hideki, but what we have to remember here is that he's dealing with an injury. He had to back out of the Players' Championship after a lock because of the back injury, had shown a bunch of signs of the back injury the few weeks before that, has been posting on social media about some of his rehab, didn't play at the WGC or Corrales last week, and I don't even know if he's going to tee it up this week. So it might end up WDing, making this a no contest with him in this parlay here. But at the same time, if he tees it up, I think he's going to look a little bit rusty. He's somebody who's an absolute gym rat, is out there practicing every single day. And given the fact that he was dealing with the back injury, very well could have been on the bench, not working things out. So this could be more of a tune-up for Hideki Matsuyama than a tournament he's actually looking to win. Of course, with the defense of his Masters title coming next week, that's going to be the prime focus for him. So not somebody that I'm actively looking to play, and somebody that'll be fading at the 12.5 greens of regulation. That's all I've got for the round 1 prize picks targets. Before we go on and get out of here, let me know what your favorite prop for round 1 is in the comments. To me, obviously, the 4.5 birdies are better. For Rory's probably my favorite prop. He's coming in with scorching form. I know we haven't seen him play this golf course very much over the years. We've also seen some first-timers have plenty of success here. In fact, 2 of the last 3 winners at this event have won in their first 2 starts. So not something I'm going to hold against him. In fact, he played back in the early 2013, 2012 range. He used to play this golf course, so it's not the first time that he's seen it. That's the prop that I'll go with, but go ahead and let me know down in the comments the prop that you'll be trying to lock in for round 1. As always, going to have even more prize picks content throughout the weekend, so make sure to look forward to that. It'll be out right around 8:30 p.m. after the slate ends. That'll be on Thursday through Saturday, so for the rest of the rounds there. And of course, if you're looking for regular golf DFS content, I post a ton of that on the channel as well. I cover DraftKings content, live streams every Wednesday covering the weather, my player poll, any live questions you have, whether it's for DFS or betting, and I'll have content for the rest of the events this year. So I appreciate you guys stopping by. If it's your first time stopping by the channel, I appreciate you guys watching and enjoying this content. Make sure you smash that subscribe button. Make sure you smash that like button if you haven't already. Good luck with all of your prop hunts. I'll see you guys next time.